Richard Hayes, 68, is a retired real estate businessman living in a small town in Texas. I always thought my later years would be peaceful, spent at the lakeside cabin filled with memories of my late wife. But at my son's birthday dinner, my granddaughter suddenly gripped my arm tight and whispered, her voice trembling, "Grandpa, we have to leave right now." I never imagined that listening to her would end up saving my life. The house that night looked far too polished, a glittering chandelier, a lavish table spread with expensive dishes, and Melissa, my daughter-in-law, hovering close, making sure my glass was never empty. I've sat through enough tough negotiations to know when someone is staging a scene, and the look in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. The moment Emily pulled me outside, I realized I had just walked away from a trap set with precision. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Because what happened after I stepped out that door, the truth about my son, my daughter-in-law, and the shadowy debts they were hiding will leave you stunned. And you won't believe how I fought back to take everything back into my own hands. I didn't sleep much that night. The image of Emily's terrified eyes stayed with me long after I shut my own. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, its blades slicing the quiet into steady intervals. But nothing about my mind felt steady. My coat was still hanging in Daniel's dining room, my plate of food abandoned. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that my granddaughter had risked angering her parents just to get me out. That was enough to tell me something far darker was waiting upstairs. I've been in real estate for 4 decades. Deals, contracts, partnerships. You learn to spot setups before they break you. The polished dinner, the catered food, the new chandelier, Melissa's constant refills, Daniel's tight smile, all of it clicked in my mind like puzzle pieces forced into place. I knew the look of a house dressed as a stage. What I didn't know yet was the script they had written for me. The next morning, the ritual of making coffee gave me a little grounding. I measured out the beans, listened to the grinder hum, and waited for the smell to rise. But even as I poured the hot water over the grounds, my thoughts circled back to Emily. Why would she plead with me like that unless she had seen something? She wasn't dramatic by nature. She was steady, thoughtful, the kind of girl who loved family dinners and hated conflict. For her to beg me to leave, something had to be seriously wrong. Daniel and I hadn't been close for years. I'd tried to support him when he pitched his business ideas, but they never amounted to much. One after another, they collapsed under the weight of big promises and poor execution. I'd lost more money than I like to admit. But what stung more was the constant blame he threw my way. Every time I held back from investing, I was unsupportive. Every time I asked for proof, I was negative. He never wanted accountability, just trust without evidence. And I've lived too long to give blind trust. 3 days before that dinner, Daniel had shown up at my door with yet another pitch. He called it the opportunity of a lifetime prime land near the lake, a resort project he swore was locked down with investors. He spoke fast, hands waving, eyes burning with conviction. He needed $200,000 as bridge money until the paperwork finalized. I listened, but instead of agreeing, I walked to my filing cabinet and pulled out a folder I'd labeled Daniel's Ventures. Inside were years of receipts, contracts, and clippings, failed condos, crypto mining rigs that never arrived, a coffee shop that dissolved into scandal. Every page was a reminder of money lost and lessons ignored. When I laid that folder in front of him, he looked like a cornered man. His jaw tightened, his words sharpened. "You never trust me," he said. "Every time I try to build something, you tear it down." I answered evenly. "I trust results, and the results speak for themselves." He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled in its frame. The very next morning, I walked outside to find all 4 of my tires slashed, not worn down, not leaky, but clean cuts right by the sidewalls. The kind of damage you couldn't patch, you had to replace them all. It was deliberate. I called Daniel to gauge his reaction. He sounded half asleep, then quickly shifted into concern. "That's terrible. Dad, probably some kids messing around. You know how it is during spring break. 4 tires, I repeated. Same puncture, same angle." A pause stretched too long, then his voice came back sharper. "Are you accusing me of something?" I didn't accuse him. I didn't need to. My gut had already answered. Now, after Emily's warning, the pattern was too clear. This wasn't about family dinners or birthdays. This was about leverage, about signatures, about getting me to hand over something that didn't belong to them. And when I thought of Melissa always near my glass, my stomach turned. They didn't just want me upstairs for a tour. They wanted me weak, compliant, and holding a pen. I sat in my leather chair, coffee cooling in my hand, staring at the folder of his failed ventures on my lap. I thought about the cabin, the place my late wife and I had built together. We had stained every board ourselves, planted the roses along the walkway, carved initials into the railing. It wasn't just property, it was memory. It was proof of a life built with care, not scams. And I had a sickening suspicion that the cabin was exactly what they were after. By noon, I couldn't sit still. I drove to the cabin, parked outside, and walked through every room. The air smelled of pine and old books. In the desk drawer, I found a lockbox with papers Linda had left me, letters, old deeds, and an envelope in her handwriting that read, "For Richard." When it matters, I didn't open it then. I wasn't ready, but I knew in my bones that moment was coming. When I got home, I called Emily. She answered in a whisper, like she was hiding in her own house. "Grandpa, I saw men upstairs before you got there," she said. "They had papers. They said once you were softened up, you'd sign." They laughed when they said it. My chest tightened. She went on, her voice breaking. "It was about the cabin. They said you wouldn't need it anymore." That was all I needed to hear. My own son, my own daughter-in-law, planning to trick me out of the last place that still felt like home, and my granddaughter caught in the middle, forced to choose between protecting me and staying silent for them. I hung up, walked to my study, and pulled out a fresh notebook. On the first page, I wrote 3 words in block letters: "Track the pattern," because this wasn't just about a cabin. This was about survival, about protecting what was left of my family's integrity, and about making sure Emily never had to carry this burden alone again. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that usually comforted me, but not that day. Instead, it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. I went through the motions: boiling water, grinding beans, pouring coffee, but every sound seemed sharper, heavier. Even the click of the refrigerator humming in the corner felt like a warning. I sat at the kitchen table with my mug, staring at the notebook where I had scrawled 3 words the night before: "Track the pattern." It looked simple, almost too plain for the weight it carried. But I knew better. In business, in life, patterns always reveal the truth if you're disciplined enough to see them. I drew 3 lines beneath it and began writing. Tuesday, Daniel pitched me a resort investment. Wednesday, tires slashed. Thursday, birthday dinner with strangers in suits waiting upstairs. The rhythm was too tight to be coincidence. It was a sequence, and like any sequence, it had a next step. By mid-morning, I walked out to the porch, coffee in hand, and saw my neighbor, Mr. Johnson, already on his post across the street. He was a man of ritual, the kind who swept his walkway the same way every morning. Precise strokes, no wasted motion. I nodded at him, and he lifted his thermos in return. That small gesture grounded me, because in a world where my own son was turning against me, it was good to know there were still men who stood steady. I spent the rest of the day trying to distract myself with small chores. I trimmed the hedges, I patched a loose board on the fence, I sharpened the garden shears, testing the blade until it sliced clean. But no matter what I did, my mind kept circling back to Emily's whisper, her fingers clutching my sleeve, the panic in her voice. "Grandpa, we have to go right now." What had she seen upstairs? She'd said there were men in suits. One had a scar by his ear, the other looked like security. They were talking about papers, not just any papers, legal ones. A will, a deed, a power of attorney. They had laughed when they said I'd be softened up. Those words echoed in my head like nails hitting steel. I had to face the truth. My son wasn't just reckless anymore. He was desperate, and desperate men make dangerous choices. By late afternoon, I couldn't ignore it any longer. I pulled out the old lockbox I'd found in the cabin and set it on my desk. Inside, tucked between my wife's letters and old receipts, was the sealed envelope in her handwriting: "For Richard, when it matters." My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a letter and a cashier's check. The letter read, "Richard, if you're reading this, it means something has gone wrong that I couldn't predict. I set aside this money so you would always have the means to act without asking permission. Use it wisely. Protect what matters. Love, Linda." I sat there staring at her words, the check heavy in my hand. Even from beyond the grave, my wife had managed to give me exactly what I needed at the exact moment I needed it. Tears welled in my eyes, but I blinked them back. Because this wasn't the time to mourn. It was the time to prepare. That evening, I called my lawyer, an old friend named Richard Kelly. He was the kind of man who still wore suspenders and wrote notes with a fountain pen. I trusted him because he had never once tried to flatter me into a bad decision. I told him everything: Daniel's pitch, the slashed tires, the birthday dinner, and Emily's warning. He didn't interrupt, just listened, scribbling in silence. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Richard, this isn't business. This is survival. You need to protect your assets now." He suggested moving the cabin into a trust, one that Daniel couldn't touch. He advised tightening my accounts, rerouting titles, creating a barrier that even a forged signature couldn't break. And Emily, I asked, she's only 18. I don't want her dragged into this. He adjusted his glasses. She's old enough to decide if she wants to speak, if she's willing. Her testimony could change everything, but keep her safe first. I left his office with a folder of fresh paperwork and a grim determination. My wife had given me the means, my lawyer had given me the path, and Emily had given me the reason. All that remained was timing. That night, just as I was settling into bed, my phone buzzed with a new message. The number was unknown, but the words chilled me. "See you Friday night, be ready." I stared at the screen, my pulse steady but hard. Whoever sent that message wasn't Daniel. It was someone else, the men upstairs, the ones with briefcases and polished shoes. They weren't finished. They were just getting started. I set the phone down, pulled my notebook closer, and wrote a new line, "Friday expect confrontation." Then I underlined it twice, because now I knew the truth. This wasn't just a family disagreement anymore. It was a setup. And if I didn't stay sharp, if I didn't use every ounce of wisdom these years had given me, they'd take everything from me: the cabin, the legacy, maybe even my freedom. But they had underestimated one thing. I wasn't a man who signed papers under pressure. I was a man who built foundations, and I was about to show them what happens when you try to tear down the wrong man's house. Friday arrived with the weight of a storm you can sense long before the clouds form. I woke before sunrise, pulled on my boots, and stepped out to the porch. The air in Texas carries a heaviness right before trouble, and that morning it felt thick enough to chew. I stood there for a while, coffee steaming in my hand, watching the street as if the asphalt itself might warn me of what was coming. I wasn't paranoid. 40 years in business had taught me the difference between nerves and signals, and everything this week had been a signal. My son's desperate pitch, the deliberate punctures in my tires, the staged dinner, and finally Emily's whispered plea. Patterns don't lie. The question wasn't if another move was coming, it was when. Around 8 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a text from Emily. It was short, careful, like she was measuring every letter. "They're planning something tonight. Be careful." That was all. No extra words. My chest tightened, not from fear, but from pride. Even in a house where she had to weigh every sentence, she still found a way to warn me. I walked back inside, opened my notebook, and wrote her message down in block letters. Dates, times, details. That notebook was becoming my spine. The place where I set the truth in ink before anyone else could twist it. Beside Emily's message, I drew a heavy underline and wrote, "Expect documents. Expect pressure." At 10, I drove to the cabin again, not because I had to, but because I needed to feel its walls around me. The gravel crunched under the tires of the rental car, and when I stepped out, the air smelled of pine and lake water. Inside, everything was as I had left it: quiet, steady, mine. I walked to the desk where the lockbox had sat and ran my hand over the wood. This place wasn't just property. It was the last corner of my life that hadn't been touched by Daniel's schemes, and I swore right then I wouldn't let him take it. I pulled the envelope from my jacket, the one Linda had written. The the one with the check inside, and slid it into the cabin's safe. Her words echoed in my head. Use it when it matters. Tonight might be exactly what she had meant. By afternoon, I was back home, pacing my study. When the landline rang, hardly anyone used that number anymore. I picked it up, and Daniel's voice came through, falsely casual. Hey, Dad, just wanted to remind you dinner tonight. Nothing fancy, just family. His words were smooth, but too rehearsed, as if each syllable had been practiced in a mirror. Who else will be there? I asked. Just a couple of friends. He said quickly, people I want you to meet. They'd love to hear about your experience. Friends in suits? I asked. The silence stretched long enough to answer my question before he spoke again. You'll see when you get here. I hung up without promising anything. Then I sat back down at my desk and wrote another line in my notebook. Friday dinner invitation. Confirmed outsiders present. At 5 o'clock. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my jacket. I wasn't nervous. I was resolved. In one pocket I carried the notebook. In the other, my old flip phone. The kind that still held a charge like it had something to prove. Evidence, communication, and control, 3 tools better than any weapon. When I arrived at Daniel's house, the first thing I noticed was the cars. Sleek, expensive models lined the curb. Cars that didn't belong in our family circle. I parked 2 houses down, exactly as he had asked, and walked the rest of the way. Melissa opened the door with a smile polished enough to belong on a realtor's billboard. Richard, she said warmly, we're so glad you could make it. Inside, the house glowed, the chandelier sparkled, the table was set with catered dishes, and bottles of wine stood like soldiers on the counter. It was a production, not a dinner. Every detail was staged. And standing near the staircase were 2 men in suits, one bald with a scar by his ear, the other broad-shouldered, built like security. They didn't greet me. They just stood there, part of the furniture, waiting. Daniel strode in, all smiles, holding a beer I hadn't asked for. Your favorite, he said, handing it to me. I set it down without taking a sip. His smile faltered, just slightly. We moved into the dining room. Melissa hovered near my chair, pouring wine into my glass before I could refuse. I slid it aside untouched. Emily slipped into the seat next to me, her smile tight, her eyes darting toward the staircase. When I placed my hand gently on hers, she whispered without moving her lips. Remember what you told me once? Listen for the steady sound under the noise. I nodded. She was right. And the steady sound tonight told me one thing: this wasn't a celebration. It was a setup. Dinner unfolded with forced laughter and hollow toasts. Daniel raised his glass to family and the future, and the room echoed his words like an audience rehearsed for applause. I pretended to eat, chewing just enough to keep them from pressing me, but every move they made only confirmed what I already knew. The suits by the staircase, Melissa's insistent refills, Daniel's restless eyes flicking toward the stairs. Halfway through, he leaned toward me, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. Dad, wait until you see what we did with the master suite. You'll love it. Just come upstairs for a minute. I set my fork down and looked at him evenly. Not tonight. Melissa chimed in, her hand warm on my shoulder. It's just a quick look. Won't take more than a minute. No, I said, louder this time. Dinner's enough. The room shifted. Conversation picked up again, but the current underneath grew stronger. One of the suited men checked his watch. The other nodded. They were waiting. For me. I kept my voice steady, my movements calm, but inside, my resolve hardened like concrete setting in the sun. They wanted me upstairs. They wanted a signature, but I wasn't going to give it. When dessert was served, Emily leaned close again, her voice barely audible. If I tell you to leave, Grandpa, don't argue, just go. I squeezed her hand once, enough to let her know I understood. Because no matter what Daniel and Melissa thought if they had planned, no matter how carefully they had staged this evening, they had underestimated 2 things: my experience and my granddaughter's courage. And by the time the night ended, they would realize they had chosen the wrong man to corner. The longer I sat at that dinner table, the more the walls felt like they were closing in. Every laugh sounded rehearsed, every glance rehearsed. My son wore a smile that didn't touch his eyes. Melissa moved around me like a hostess at a show home. And those 2 men by the staircase never blinked. They weren't there to eat. They were there to make sure I played my part. I pushed my plate forward and folded my hands. "Daniel," I said evenly, "what exactly is all this about?" He raised his eyebrows as if offended by the question, then chuckled. The sound thin and hollow. "Dad, it's just dinner. Don't overthink it." But I had spent too many years reading people in boardrooms to miss what was written all over his face. He was buying time, easing me into something. Melissa set down a dish of cake, her voice bright. "Why don't we all move into the living room after dessert? We can talk in comfort." Her hand brushed my shoulder again, too rehearsed to be affection. I caught Emily's eyes across the table. She gave the tiniest shake of her head. I leaned back in my chair. "This table's fine." My words dropped like stones into the silence. For a beat, no one moved. Then Daniel forced a laugh, but the tension had already cracked the room open. The bald man with the scar stepped forward. His shoes were polished enough to reflect the chandelier, and when he spoke, his voice carried the clipped precision of someone used to giving orders. "Mr. Hayes, we won't waste your time. There are some papers upstairs that need your signature." The room froze. Melissa's smile faltered. Daniel's beer bottle clinked too hard against the table, and Emily's hand under the table squeezed mine like a lifeline. I looked directly at the man, and if I refuse... His lips curled slightly, as though he had rehearsed this line. That would be unwise. Daniel jumped in quickly, trying to smooth it over. "Dad, it's just a formality. Some transfer paperwork for the resort deal. Nothing major. These gentlemen are here to help expedite it." I laughed once, low and sharp. Expedite or enforce. My gaze stayed locked on Daniel. His jaw flexed. His eyes darted toward Melissa, then back to me. He was unraveling, thread by thread. Emily shifted closer, her voice barely audible. "Grandpa, please don't." Her grip tightened on my hand. That little tremor in her voice gave me more strength than any glass of wine ever could. I stood slowly, letting the chair legs scrape against the floor. "If you want my signature, you'll have to earn it the old-fashioned way. Convince me, not corner me." The scarred man took a step forward, but I raised a hand. Palm steady. "One more step, and I'll make a call that changes this entire evening. Believe me, I have friends who answer when I ring." My voice was calm, but I meant every word, because while I hadn't dialed Richard Kelly yet, my lawyer was on standby and he knew to contact the sheriff if I didn't check in. Melissa's mask cracked for the first time. Her tone dropped, no longer sweet. "Richard, why are you making this so difficult? You've always said family comes first. Don't you want Daniel to succeed? Don't you want to secure Emily's future?" I turned to her, eyes steady. "Don't you dare use her name in this. She's the only one at this table who isn't lying to me." Silence swallowed the room. Daniel's face flushed red. His voice rose, louder than he intended. "You think you're so much smarter, don't you? Always looking down on me, always judging. Well, tonight you don't get to control everything." He slammed his fist on the table. The cake plate rattled. A fork clattered to the floor. For a second, he looked like a child again, angry that his toy had been taken away. Only this time, the stakes weren't toys. They were the last piece of my life that mattered: the cabin. I straightened my jacket and picked up my notebook. Sliding it into my pocket, "I'm leaving," I said simply. The men moved at once, but Emily shot to her feet. "Stop," she shouted, her voice clear and fierce. "If you touch him, I'll scream so loud the neighbors will come running, and I'll tell them everything I heard upstairs. Every single word." For the first time that night, the men hesitated. Their eyes flicked to Daniel, waiting for his signal, but he didn't give one. He just stood there, trembling, caught between fear and fury. I stepped toward the door. "This dinner is over. You want to talk business? Make an appointment with my lawyer. Otherwise, stay away from me." Melissa's voice followed me, low and venomous. "You'll regret this. Richard, you'll regret making an enemy out of your own blood." I paused at the door and looked back. "No, Melissa, the only thing I regret is raising a son who can't tell the difference between building a legacy and destroying one." Then Emily slipped her hand into mine, and together we walked out into the cool night air. The stars were sharp above us, and for the first time in days, I could breathe. But deep down I knew this wasn't finished. As we walked to the car, Emily whispered, "They won't stop. Grandpa, They'll try again. I nodded, my jaw set. Then we'll be ready. Next time, they won't just find a stubborn old man, they'll find a wall they can't break. And in that moment, under the Texas night, I knew the real battle had only just begun. When I woke the next morning, the weight of what had happened at Daniel's house still pressed on my chest. Emily's voice replayed in my head, her courage, her fear, her clear warning that they wouldn't stop. I poured myself a black coffee and sat down with my notebook. Every page was now a record of betrayal, but also a blueprint. If they thought they could corner me like some senile old man, they had miscalculated. I wrote down a new heading, countermoves. Beneath it, I made 3 points: 1, secure the cabin; 2, protect Emily; 3, expose the truth. Those weren't just goals. They were necessities. Because Daniel and Melissa had already crossed the line, and once someone steps over that threshold, the only way forward is defense sharpened into offense. At 9 o'clock, the landline rang again. Same unknown number as before. I let it ring 4 times before picking up. Silence at first, then a low male voice. Unfamiliar. "Mr. Hayes, you embarrassed some good people last night." His tone was calm, but calm like a knife laid on a table. "Next time, you won't walk out so easy." I didn't flinch. "Next time, you'll find I don't scare easy. Whoever you are, remember this. I've built deals bigger than you've ever dreamed of. And I've buried men twice your size in courtrooms. Try me." Then I hung up. My hands didn't shake, but I could feel my pulse, steady and strong. By midday, I was sitting across from Richard Kelly, my lawyer, in his oak-paneled office. I handed him my notebook. Page by page, he read silently, adjusting his glasses, his brow tightening. When he reached the end, he looked at me over the rims. "Richard, this is more than greed. This is coercion. If they push you again, it edges into criminal territory." I leaned back, then we used the law, but quietly. Emily is still in that house, and I won't let her become collateral damage. He nodded. "We'll file paperwork this afternoon. The cabin goes into a trust under your granddaughter's name. That way, Daniel and Melissa can shout, beg, or scheme all they want. The deed won't touch their hands." For the first time in days, I felt a measure of relief. Linda had always wanted Emily to inherit the cabin one day. Maybe this betrayal was the fire that would forge that destiny sooner. After leaving the lawyer's office, I drove straight to the sheriff's department. Sheriff Harris was a man I had known since his rookie days, and he carried himself with the no-nonsense grit of someone who had seen every kind of lie. I didn't give him everything I held back Emily's part, but I told him enough. The slashed tires, the staged dinner, the pressure to sign documents. He scribbled it all down, then leaned back. "Richard," he said, "sounds like your boy's gotten himself tangled up with the wrong crowd. You're right to be cautious. I'll keep a car swinging past your place the next few nights." That evening, Emily called me from a friend's phone. Her voice was hurried, laced with panic. "Grandpa, they're arguing. Dad keeps saying he needs money now, that the people he owes aren't patient. Mom's the one pushing about the cabin. She says it's the only way out." My stomach sank. Though I had already suspected, this wasn't just about greed. Daniel was in deep with someone dangerous, and Melissa calculating. Ambitious Melissa was trying to fix it the only way she knew, by sacrificing me. "Emily," I said, keeping my voice calm, "listen to me. You're not safe if they know you're warning me. Stay quiet, stay smart, and when you can, I'll come get you." There was a pause, then her voice, trembling but firm. "I trust you, Grandpa." After the call, I sat alone in my study, staring at the framed photo of Linda on the mantel. Her smile still reached through the glass, steady and sure. "You always said family was both the hardest test and the greatest gift," I whispered. "Looks like I've got to pass that test without you now." At 10 that night, I heard a car slow roll past the house. I peeked through the blinds and caught the gleam of headlights lingering too long, then it moved on. 5 minutes later, another pass. My gut told me it wasn't the sheriff's patrol. I grabbed my notebook and added a new entry: surveillance, day 5. Laying back in my chair, I closed my eyes, but I didn't rest. Instead, I built my countermoves in my mind. First, secure Emily. Second, Get hard proof of Daniel's debts. Third, make Melissa's part undeniable. Only then could I bring it all down without bloodshed. Because this wasn't about fighting fire with fire anymore. This was about using the one thing I had that Daniel never learned, to value discipline. When the clock hit midnight, I checked the locks, placed the notebook under my pillow, and whispered a promise into the dark. You wanted to corner me. But you've forgotten I've lived my whole life building foundations, and I'll make sure yours crumbles before mine ever does. Saturday morning broke with the sound of rain tapping against the windows. Texas storms roll in heavy, sudden, and that day it felt fitting. Trouble had already gathered on my horizon, and now the sky was just catching up. I brewed coffee the way I always did, but the ritual didn't calm me. The kitchen felt smaller, the house tighter, like the storm outside. Everything in my life was circling closer. I sat with my notebook open, flipping back through the pages, dates, texts, suspicious phone calls. Emily's warnings, it all formed a picture even the blind could see. My son wasn't just reckless anymore. He was drowning. And Melissa, sharp and cold, was tying a stone to his ankle and trying to use me as the rope to pull him back up. At 9, my phone rang. It was Emily again, this time from her school library, whispering into the line, "Grandpa, I think they're planning something tonight. Dad got a call, and he said if you don't sign, we'll all be finished. Mom kept telling him to keep you compliant." Her voice cracked on the word. I gripped the phone tighter, my jaw locked. "Emily," I said quietly, "listen to me. You're the only one I trust in that house. Stay close to people. Don't let them see you scared. I'll come for you soon. But until then, you keep your head down, understand?" "Yes," she whispered, "but Grandpa, please be careful. They're desperate." After the call, I drove to the sheriff's office again. Harris greeted me with his usual dry expression. I slid my notebook across the desk. "Add this," I said. He flipped through the entries, his eyebrows rising at the detailed notes. "Richard, you could teach half my deputies how to document a case." He muttered, then he leaned back. "If what you're saying is true, tonight could be the breaking point. They'll push you hard." "I know," I said. "That's why I want eyes on their house. Not just for me, for Emily." He nodded slowly. "I'll see what I can do." By afternoon, the storm had passed, leaving the streets slick and the air heavy with that post-rain stillness. I drove out to the cabin again, needing its silence. Inside, I pulled the safe open and took out Linda's envelope. I reread her words: use it wisely, protect what matters. That check wasn't just money, it was my late wife's voice telling me not to back down. I slid the envelope back, then sat at the old desk and began writing a letter of my own. Addressed to Emily, I told her about the cabin, about her grandmother's strength, about why integrity matters even when the world tries to buy it cheap. "One day," I wrote, "you'll inherit more than this cabin. You'll inherit the weight of knowing the truth. Carry it steady, carry it proud." I sealed the letter and placed it with Linda's, just in case. That evening, as dusk fell, I parked across from Daniel's house. I wasn't going inside, not yet. I wanted to watch. From the shadows, I saw cars arrive, black SUVs, tinted windows. Men in tailored suits stepped out, carrying slim briefcases. They weren't friends. They weren't neighbors. They were the kind of men you only saw when money was owed. My chest tightened as I saw Daniel greet them with a nervous handshake. Melissa was right behind him, her smile professional, her hand brushing one man's arm as she led them inside. She wasn't afraid. She was orchestrating. I stayed until the last car left around 10. Daniel walked them out, his face pale, his shoulders hunched. Melissa followed, whispering sharply into his ear. They looked like two people shackled together, dragging each other deeper into the pit. I drove home in silence, headlights cutting through the wet asphalt. The image of Emily in that house gnawed at me. I knew what had to be done. At midnight, my phone buzzed again, a text from Daniel's dad. "This is your last chance. Tomorrow. We settle this. Don't make it harder than it needs to be." I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. The storm had passed, but another one was forming, bigger and darker than anything outside. And for the first time, I felt something cold and steady settle in my chest. Not fear, not even anger. Resolve. I picked up my pen and wrote in the notebook, "Tomorrow final push expected. Prepare counterstrike." Then I closed the book, locked the doors, and whispered into the quiet house, "Linda, I hear you. I'll protect what matters." The battle line had been drawn. Tomorrow. They would come with their papers, their threats, and their desperation, but tomorrow I would be ready. Sunday morning carried the silence of a battlefield before the first shot. The air was heavy, the streets quiet, and even the birds seemed to hold their breath. I rose before dawn, dressed in a clean shirt, polished shoes, and tucked my notebook into my jacket pocket. If this was to be the day they made their final push, I was going to meet it standing tall, not hunched over like prey. By 7, my phone buzzed again. Another text from Daniel, "Come to the house at noon. No excuses." I read it twice, then closed the phone. The wording was different this time, shorter, harsher. He wasn't trying to persuade anymore. He was issuing orders. I spent the morning at the cabin. I unlocked the safe, pulled out Linda's envelope, and placed my letter to Emily beside it. If things went sideways today, I wanted her to know the truth. I sat in that cabin's stillness for a long time, letting its strength seep into me. The wood creaked like an old friend shifting in his chair, and I felt Linda's presence steadying me. When I finally rose, I whispered into the rafters, "This ends today." At 11:30, I parked 2 streets away from Daniel's house and walked the rest of the way. SUVs were already lined up outside, engines idling, their drivers scanning the street with sharp eyes. These weren't neighbors. They weren't family. They were creditors or worse. Melissa opened the door the moment I stepped onto the porch, her smile tight, brittle. "Richard, thank you for coming." Her tone was honey, but her eyes were steel. Inside, the air reeked of tension. Daniel stood at the head of the dining table, papers spread across it. The scarred man from before leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Another man I hadn't seen before sat with a leather briefcase on his lap. The house was no longer a home. It was an office for threats. "Dad," Daniel began, voice too loud, "let's not drag this out. We need your signature on these documents. It's for the resort deal, just like I told you." His hand trembled as he gestured to the papers. I pulled out my notebook and set it squarely on the table. "You mean these," I said. "The power of attorney transfer, the deed transfer, and the authorization to liquidate accounts." Their eyes flicked in surprise. They hadn't expected me to know the exact documents. Daniel's face flushed. "Who told you?" I told myself. I interrupted, tapping the notebook, "Because I know how patterns work. You've been predictable from the start." Melissa's mask slipped. "Richard, stop making this difficult. Just sign, and this will all go away." I leaned forward. "Melissa, you've already made it difficult. You lured me with dinners, tried to drug me with wine, surrounded me with your men. And all for what? To steal the last piece of my life that matters." The scarred man stepped closer, his hand brushing his jacket pocket. "Mr. Hayes, no one needs to get hurt. Sign the papers, and we all walk away." But before I could answer, a clear voice rang out from the hallway. "He's not signing anything." Emily stood there, clutching her school backpack like a shield. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with fire. "I heard everything," she said, her voice trembling but loud enough for the room. "You tried to trick him, to take the cabin, and I won't let you." For a moment, silence swallowed the room. Daniel's eyes widened in panic. "Emily, go upstairs." "No," she said, planting her feet. "I already called Grandpa's lawyer and the sheriff. They know what's happening right now." I smiled for the first time all week. Richard Kelly had promised me a safety net, and clearly Emily had woven herself right into it. The scarred man looked at Daniel, waiting for instruction. Daniel's hands shook. He was caught between rage and terror. Melissa hissed at him, "Do something." But before he could, red and blue lights flickered outside the windows. Doors slammed. Voices called out. Sheriff Harris's drawl cut through the chaos. "This is the sheriff's department. Step outside. Now." Melissa's face drained of color. Daniel's shoulders sagged. The suits exchanged glances and slowly raised their hands. The scarred man muttered a curse under his breath, but even he stepped back. I stood, straightening my jacket. "This dinner is over," I said firmly. You wanted to take everything from me. Instead, you've lost everything that mattered: your integrity, your family, and your freedom. And Emily ran to my side, her small hand slipping into mine. I squeezed it, steady and proud, together. We walked out onto the porch as deputies swarmed the house. The storm that had hovered all week finally broke, not in thunder, but in the sound of justice. Sheriff Harris tipped his hat at me. "Richard, you've got yourself one hell of a granddaughter." I looked down at Emily, her chin lifted high despite the tears brimming in her eyes. "Yes," I said softly, "she's the best thing this family's ever built." As the deputies led Daniel and Melissa away, I felt the weight I'd carried all week begin to lift, not because the fight was over, but because I knew where the true foundation of my life lay. Not in money, not in property, but in the courage of a girl who had saved her grandfather with nothing more than the truth. That night, as Emily and I sat back at the cabin, I pulled out Linda's envelope and showed her the letter I'd written. She read it silently, then hugged me so tight I thought my ribs might crack. "Grandpa," she whispered, "we're going to be okay." I kissed the top of her head. "Yes, Emily, because we've already passed the hardest test." And for the first time in a long while, I knew she was right. The morning after the arrests, the sun rose clear and sharp, as if the storm of the past week had scrubbed the air clean. But inside me, the storm hadn't passed. Relief was there, yes, but it was braided tightly with exhaustion and a raw ache I couldn't shake. Because even as Daniel and Melissa sat in custody, I knew their mess was larger than one night's betrayal. Emily was curled on the couch in the cabin's living room, wrapped in one of Linda's old quilts. She had fallen asleep sometime after midnight, her head on my shoulder, whispering that she finally felt safe. I watched her breathe, steady now, and I thought of all the weight she had carried in silence before she warned me. No teenager should ever have to stand against their own parents. By 7 o'clock, I had coffee brewing and eggs frying in the pan. When Emily woke, she rubbed her eyes and gave me a tired smile. "I dreamed Grandma was here," she murmured. "She said we did the right thing." I felt my throat tighten. "She'd be proud of you. Emily, you saved me. You saved us both." We ate in quiet, the cabin creaking around us in the morning air. But soon enough, the silence broke. My phone rang. Sheriff Harris. His voice was steady, but it carried weight. "Richard, we've got Daniel and Melissa downtown. They're facing charges: fraud, coercion, conspiracy, but," he hesitated, "the men in those suits, they're not talking. They're part of something bigger. And it looks like your son owed more than we realized." I closed my eyes. How bad? Bad enough that people outside this county will want answers. Harris said, "They'll come looking for what they think is theirs. You need to be careful." After the call, I walked outside, the gravel crunching under my boots. The lake shimmered in the distance, but even its calm couldn't ease the weight settling in my chest. Daniel had dug a hole so deep. He hadn't just tried to bury me, he had opened the door to people who wouldn't let go easily. Emily followed me onto the porch. What did the sheriff say? I didn't want to scare her, but I wouldn't lie either. "It means this isn't over yet. Your dad, he was in over his head with people who don't forgive debt. They may still come around." She swallowed hard. "Then we'll fight them too." Her words struck me like a hammer. Brave, yes, but she was still just a girl. I put my arm around her shoulders. "No, Emily, I'll fight them. Your job is to live your life, to stay safe. I'll carry the rest." Later that morning, Richard Kelly came to the cabin. He laid a thick folder on the table, his fountain pen clipped neatly inside. "The trust is filed," he said. "The cabin is officially protected under Emily's name. They can't touch it now, not legally, but—" He paused, adjusting his glasses. "You should prepare for other tactics. Desperate people don't follow rules." "I know," I said, "but I'm not about to hand over my life to shadows." Emily sat quietly at the table, listening, when Kelly left. She looked at me with wide eyes. "Grandpa, do you think Dad will hate me forever?" The question hit me harder than any threat. I sat beside her, taking her hand. "Emily, your father made choices, hard, ugly choices. That doesn't mean you have to carry his shame. You did what was right, sometimes. Love means telling the truth, even when it breaks you. Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, notebook in my lap, writing every detail from the day the sheriff's warning, Kelly's trust papers, Emily's question. Then I added a line at the bottom. This story isn't over. Protect the cabin, protect Emily, expose the rest. Around midnight, headlights swept across the yard. My heart jolted. A black SUV slowed in front of the cabin, then idled for a moment. The silhouette of a man sat behind the wheel, unmoving, watching. My pulse quickened, but I didn't move from my chair. Finally, the engine growled and the SUV rolled away into the dark. I wrote a new entry in the notebook, unmarked SUV. Midnight, surveillance confirmed. When I finally crawled into bed, Emily stirred and asked sleepily, "Is it over, Grandpa?" I brushed her hair back from her face. "Not yet," I whispered, "but we're ready." And as I lay there in the dark, I realized the truth. Daniel and Melissa were just the beginning. The real storm was still coming. But storms don't scare a man who's built foundations all his life. They just test how strong the walls really are. The next morning began with a knock on the cabin door. Not a gentle tap, but 3 hard raps that echoed through the wood like warning shots. Emily stirred on the couch, half asleep, clutching her blanket tighter. I motioned for her to stay put, then opened the door. Sheriff Harris stood there, his hat in his hands and lines carved deep across his face. "Richard," he said, "we need to talk." I stepped aside, and he walked in, his boots leaving wet marks on the floor. He didn't sit right away. Instead, he looked around the cabin, as if checking every corner. Finally, he lowered himself into the chair across from me. "We picked up chatter last night," he said. "Those men at Daniel's house weren't just loan sharks. They're connected to an outfit that doesn't let go once money's on the table. Your son owes them, and now they're sniffing around you." I felt my jaw tighten. "They circled the cabin last night. SUV, midnight." Harris nodded grimly. "Yeah, that fits." He leaned in. "You need to understand, Richard, these folks don't think in contracts and courts. They think in leverage, which means Emily could be at risk too." The air in the cabin thickened. Emily was sitting on the couch, her eyes wide, listening despite my earlier warning to stay out of it. I turned toward her. "Go to your room, sweetheart." But she shook her head. "No, I need to hear this. If they're coming after us, I should know." Harris sighed. "She's right. Richard, shielding her won't make this easier." I hated it, but I nodded. Emily was already too deep in this storm. She deserved the truth. "Here's the deal," Harris continued. "We can place a patrol near the cabin, but these guys are slippery. They'll watch, wait, and pick their moment. You've got 2 choices: lie low and hope they move on, or take the fight to them by making Daniel's debt and their pressure public." "Public?" I asked. He nodded. "Court filings, newspaper, hell, even the local news. If sunlight hits them, they'll scatter. They hate exposure, but it also paints a target on you until it blows over." I leaned back, staring at the wood-paneled ceiling. This wasn't a boardroom negotiation. It was survival, and survival meant thinking 2 steps ahead. "Give me until tomorrow," I said finally. "I'll decide." After Harris left, Emily walked over and sat beside me. Her voice was small but steady. "Grandpa, I don't care if they come after me. I'm not scared anymore." I looked at her, really looked, and saw the steel in her eyes. Linda's steel. Bravery doesn't mean you're not scared. Emily, it means you do what's right even when you are, but I'll be damned if I let them use you against me. That afternoon, Richard Kelly came by again, folder in hand. "Richard, I've been digging," he said. "Your son's debt is tied to a company out of Houston Front Business for organized crime. If they can't get the money, they'll try for astasraso, which means you in the cabin." He spread papers across the table: names, shell companies, transactions. My notebook suddenly felt small compared to the evidence he had gathered. I scanned the pages, then tapped one with my finger. This one. They funneled money through a fake resort deal. That's what Daniel tried to rope me into signing. Kelly nodded. "Exactly. If you'd signed, they'd have transferred the cabin as collateral, then you'd be out, with no legal recourse." My stomach clenched, but I kept my face calm. "So what do we do?" We build a case, Kelly said firmly, and we make it airtight. But you have to be ready. Richard, this will get uglier before it gets cleaner. That night, Emily and I ate dinner in silence. The cabin creaked. The lake outside lapped softly against the shore, but the weight between us was heavy. Finally, she spoke. Grandpa, do you ever wish you'd just signed the papers? That way it would all be over? I set my fork down, staring at her. No, because over wouldn't mean safe. Over would mean broken. And broken is something we don't come back from. She nodded slowly, her shoulders squaring. Then I'll stand with you, no matter how ugly it gets. Later, after she went to bed, I sat by the fire, writing in the notebook again. The flame's glow flickered across the pages as I wrote, threats escalating. Daniel's debt tied to organized crime, Emily at risk, next step, sunlight. I closed the book, leaned back, and let the fire warm my face. The path was dangerous, maybe deadly, but, for the first time, I knew exactly where it led. Tomorrow, I would take the fight out of the shadows. Because shadows only win when you stay in them. The next day, I woke before the sun. The cabin quiet except for the steady breathing of Emily down the hall. I brewed coffee and sat at the table, my notebook open in front of me. The fire from the night before had burned down to embers, but I could still feel its heat. Today was the day. No more waiting, no more hiding in shadows. I drove into town just after dawn, the streets still empty. Richard Kelly's office light was already on. He was a man who believed in beating the sunrise. He looked up as I entered, his tie already perfectly knotted. His desk cleared, but for the folder we'd been building. You've decided, he said, reading my face. I nodded. We take it public. If they want to come for me, they're going to have to do it under the light. Kelly pushed the folder toward me. Then here's what we'll do. We'll file a civil complaint this morning, tying Daniel's debt and the attempted coercion directly to those shell companies. Once it's in the system, it becomes public record. From there, I'll leak it to the Chronicle. And I've already made a call to a reporter who owes me a favor. It was bold, dangerous, exactly what I wanted. By noon, the filings were stamped and sealed. My son's name, Melissa's schemes, the Houston Front Company, it was all there in black and white. I signed my statement with a steady hand, each stroke of the pen a strike against the shadows that had tried to swallow me whole. At 2 o'clock, the Chronicle called. A reporter named Sandra Torres wanted an interview. Mr. Hayes, she said, I've read your filing. It's explosive. Do you want to go on record? I glanced at Kelly, who gave me a small nod. Yes, I said, but not for me, for my granddaughter. She deserves to know her family's name won't be buried in lies. The article went live that evening. Headline bold across the page. Local businessman exposes family tied to fraud scheme. My phone buzzed nonstop calls from old friends, neighbors, even men I hadn't spoken to in years. Some offered support, some whispered warnings. Emily sat beside me on the couch, scrolling through the article on her phone. They quoted you. Grandpa, she said, her voice almost awed. You said, family isn't ownership, it's trust. And once trust is broken, you fight to protect what's left. I hadn't realized she was reading. I smiled faintly. That's what your grandmother would have said. But as night fell, the response from the other side arrived. At 9 p.m., a stone crashed through the cabin window, shattering glass across the floor. Emily screamed. Ducking low, I pulled her to me, my heart pounding, scanning the dark outside. Headlights flared once at the edge of the trees, then vanished. I called Harris immediately. He arrived 20 minutes later, his deputies sweeping the area with flashlights. They're sending a message, he said grimly. Your article rattled them. They won't just sit back now. Emily clung to my arm, her voice trembling. Grandpa, what if they come inside next time? I wrapped her tight against me. Then we'll be ready. They can break glass, but they can't break us. The sheriff posted a deputy outside the cabin for the night, but I knew it was temporary. Harris pulled me aside before he left. Richard, you've stirred up a hornet's nest. The article was the right move, but it also paints you as the target. They'll try harder now. Be careful. After they left, Emily and I swept the glass, then taped cardboard over the window. She sat on the couch, knees drawn up, eyes still wide. Grandpa, she whispered. Do you ever wish you hadn't gone public? I shook my head firmly. No, because silence would have killed us slower, at least this way. The fight is out in the open, and out in the open. We can win. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the table with my notebook, every sense alive, listening for footsteps, for engines, for anything. I wrote one line, over and over, until the pen dug grooves into the paper. We fight in the light. At dawn, I stepped onto the porch. The lake reflected the rising sun, golden and calm, behind me. Emily stirred awake, her voice soft but steady. Grandpa, I'm not afraid anymore. I turned to her, my chest tightening with pride. Good, because this storm isn't over, but neither are we. And as the sun rose higher, I realized the truth. The fight wasn't just about protecting a cabin, or even a name. It was about proving that no matter how dark the world tried to get, we still had the power to choose light. And I was ready to see it through to the end. The morning after the stone shattered our window, the cabin felt different. The air was sharp, like a wire stretched too tight. Emily was quiet, following me from room to room, as if she feared I might disappear the moment she blinked. I tried to keep my voice steady, to keep the routine alive. Coffee, breakfast, checking the locks, but deep down I knew we had crossed a line. By mid-morning, the deputy stationed outside knocked on the door. Mr. Hayes? I'll be honest, he said, his hand resting on the brim of his hat. We can't keep a unit here full-time. The department doesn't have the manpower. Sheriff says you should consider relocating, at least until things calm down. Relocating? The word tasted like defeat. The cabin wasn't just wood and nails. It was Linda's memory. It was my promise to Emily. Leaving now would be handing victory to the very people I had exposed. I shook my head. Tell Harris I'm not moving. This is my ground. If they want me, they'll find me right here. The deputy hesitated, then nodded, then stay sharp, sir. We'll swing by when we can. After he left, Emily looked at me with wide eyes. Grandpa, what if they come back and it's worse next time? I crouched down, taking her hands in mine. Then we'll be ready. Remember what I told you? Fear doesn't win unless you let it, and I'll never let it take you. That afternoon, Kelly called. His voice was tight, urgent. Richard, the Chronicle piece is spreading. A Houston news station picked it up. That's good, it means more light. But it also means those men will feel cornered. They may lash out harder. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You've made your point. Old man, now it's our turn. I showed it to Kelly. He exhaled sharply. That's a threat. Screenshot it, forward it to me. We'll add it to the file. The rest of the day passed in tense quiet. Emily tried to distract herself with homework, but every sound outside made her jump. I spent the evening cleaning my shotgun, not because I wanted to use it, but because sometimes preparedness is the only thing that keeps wolves at bay. At around 10 o'clock, just as Emily was drifting off to sleep, headlights swept across the cabin again. This time, the car didn't slow, it stopped. I rose silently, heart pounding, and peered through the slit in the cardboard-covered window. Two men got out. One of them carried a baseball bat. The other had his hand shoved deep into his jacket. I motioned for Emily to stay quiet and crouched low. My phone was already in my hand. Dialing Harris. He picked up on the second ring. They're here, I whispered. Two men outside, one armed. Stay inside, he ordered. We're on the way. But minutes feel like hours when danger stands on your porch. The first man tested the doorknob. Rattling it, the second circled to the side, tapping the bat against the wall. Emily's breath came fast and shallow beside me. I put a finger to my lips, urging her to stay calm. Then, suddenly, the sound of sirens split the night. Red and blue lights flashed through the trees, bouncing across the cabin walls. The men bolted, sprinting back to their car. Tires screeched on gravel, and the vehicle roared away into the dark. Emily burst into tears, clinging to me. I held her tight, my own heart hammering, but relief surged through me. Harris's cruiser pulled up moments later, deputies jumping out. They combed the woods, but the men were gone. Inside, Harris studied the broken footprints on the porch. You see their faces? Not clearly, I admitted, but I saw enough to know they weren't bluffing. He looked at me hard. Richard, This won't stop until they're taken down properly. You've rattled them, but now we need to break them. That night, long after Harris left and Emily was finally asleep, I sat by the fire again, notebook open. I replayed every moment the men at the door, Emily's trembling hand in mine, the screech of their tires as they fled. Then I wrote escalation confirmed. They'll try again. Next move, turn defense into offense. For years I had built a life on foundations, solid, unmoving, unshakable, but tonight I realized something new. Sometimes survival doesn't mean standing still. Sometimes it means stepping forward into the fire before it consumes you. I closed the notebook, set my jaw, and whispered into the flames, "Linda, I won't let them touch her. I won't let them touch what's ours. Tomorrow, I take the fight to them." And with that promise burning in my chest, I finally knew what came next. The next morning, I woke before the first light. My body ached from a night of no sleep, but my mind was sharp, clearer than it had been in days. The knock on the door, the men with the bat. Emily's tears, they had pushed me past the point of waiting. It was time to stop reacting. It was time to move. I brewed strong coffee, poured it into a thermos, and tucked my notebook under my arm. Emily stirred on the couch as I slipped on my jacket. Her voice was groggy but worried. "Grandpa, where are you going?" I bent down, brushed her hair back gently, into town, to make sure the people who came here last night don't come back. Her eyes widened. "But it's dangerous." I nodded. "Yes, that's why I have to do it. You stay here, lock the door behind me. Sheriff's patrol will swing by in an hour. You'll be safe." She didn't argue. Instead, she whispered, "Be careful." By 7, I was sitting in Kelly's office again. He poured himself tea and studied the circles under my eyes. "You're ready to push harder," he said. "Yes," I replied. "I'm done waiting for them to make the next move. We know who they are, who Daniel owed. I want names. I want leverage. If they're hunting me, then I'm hunting back." Kelly opened his folder, flipping through the paperwork we'd gathered. The main shell company is called Bayview Holdings. On paper, they own real estate in Houston. In truth, they funnel money for a syndicate. If we can trace the line between Daniel's loan and Bayview, we can tie them legally. That kind of evidence doesn't just protect you, it cripples them. "Then we do it," I said, "but how do we get the proof?" Kelly hesitated. "There's a man, an accountant who used to work for Bayview. He left under pressure, but he knows their books. He might be willing to talk. I can set up a meeting." By 10 o'clock, we were parked outside a rundown diner on the edge of Houston. Inside, we found the accountant thin, nervous, clutching a cup of black coffee like it was his lifeline. His name was Alan. He looked around the room twice before speaking. "You don't understand what you're poking," he muttered. "These men don't forgive. They don't forget." I leaned forward. "What they don't understand is me. I'm not asking for permission. I'm asking for truth." Alan hesitated, then slid a small flash drive across the table. "This has copies of ledgers, proof of loans, payoffs, transfers, including one tied to your son. If you use this, you'll have them by the throat. But if they find out I gave it to you, I'll be a dead man." Kelly picked it up carefully. "You'll be protected. We'll make sure of it." Alan shook his head, staring at me with hollow eyes. "Just remember, sunlight burns, but it also blinds. Be ready." We left the diner in silence, the flash drive sitting heavy in Kelly's pocket. "On the ride back," he said, "this is it. Richard, with this, we can push the DA to open a full investigation." That night, back at the cabin, I watched Emily scrolling through her phone. Reading the Chronicle article again, she looked up. "Grandpa, people are calling you a hero." I smiled faintly. Heroes are just people who don't quit when they should. That's all. But the smile faded when headlights flickered again outside the cabin. This time, they didn't linger, they drove off quickly. Still, I knew it wasn't over. The flash drive was a spark, and sparks always draw attention. After Emily went to bed, I opened my notebook and wrote Bayview Holdings. Flash drive secured, proof in hand, next step delivered to DA, prepare for retaliation. As the fire crackled beside me, I closed the notebook and leaned back in my chair. For the first time in weeks, I felt something shift inside me. Not just survival, not just defense. Momentum. They had brought the fight to my door, but tomorrow I would carry it to theirs. Because if there's one thing a lifetime of building foundations teaches you, it's this: storms don't destroy what stands firm. They only reveal what was weak all along. The next morning, I drove into the city with Kelly riding shotgun and the flash drive locked tight in his briefcase. The highway stretched long and empty, but I could feel eyes on us the entire way. Every black SUV in the rear view made my chest tighten. Every car that lingered too long in the next lane felt like a shadow waiting to pounce. We pulled up to the Harris County District Attorney's office just after 9. The building loomed tall, a slab of concrete and glass that promised law and order, but reeked of bureaucracy. Inside, a young assistant ushered us into a conference room. 10 minutes later, District Attorney Carla Reyes walked in, her heels sharp against the floor. She was a woman with a reputation ruthless against corruption, but cautious about what cases she picked. Kelly laid the flash drive on the table. This contains proof of fraud, coercion, and organized crime activity tied to Bayview Holdings. It also shows direct attempts to seize property from my client, Richard Hayes, through forged documents and intimidation. Reyes studied us both with narrowed eyes. Mr. Hayes, I've read the Chronicle article. I don't usually let the press dictate my docket, but if what's on this drive is as strong as you say, I'll move. I leaned forward. It's strong. Strong enough to put names on paper. Strong enough to stop them from circling my granddaughter's home at night. She considered me for a long moment before sliding the drive across the table to her IT specialist. We'll verify, if it checks out. We open an investigation today. For the first time in weeks, hope flickered, but hope doesn't come free. On the way back, Kelly's phone buzzed. He frowned as he read the message. "Richard," he said slowly, "someone knows we went to the DA. The message says you won't make it home tonight." I gripped the wheel tighter. The air in the truck turned heavy, like the humidity before a tornado. "Then let's make sure we do," I muttered. We stayed alert at the whole drive back. Every turn of the road another chance for headlights to appear behind us. But somehow, we made it to the cabin without incident. Emily was waiting on the porch, her face pale. "Grandpa, men came by while you were gone. They didn't try to get in, but they sat out there in a car for an hour, just watching." I hugged her tight, anger burning hot in my chest. "It won't be for much longer. Sweetheart, we put the truth in the right hands today." That evening, Kelly stayed with us. He insisted it was safer not to travel back into town. Emily made us sandwiches, trying to keep busy, but her hands trembled as she spread the mustard. I could see the fear wearing on her, but beneath it, there was still that spark of defiance. Around 9, just as we were clearing the dishes, the phone rang. I answered, half expecting Harris, but instead, a voice I didn't recognize slithered through the line. "You should have signed, old man," it hissed. "You brought the law into this. Now you'll watch it burn." Then the line went dead. Kelly dialed the sheriff immediately, relaying the threat. Harris promised a patrol would be sent, but I could hear the frustration in his voice. He didn't have enough men to sit on us all night. At 10, I walked outside onto the porch. The night air was cool, the lake glimmering under the moonlight. For a moment, it was quiet, almost peaceful. Then I saw it, a faint orange glow on the tree line. "Fire!" I shouted, bolting down the steps. Emily and Kelly ran after me. Flames licked the dry grass, spreading fast in the wind. Someone had set the woods alight, hoping to smoke us out. Back inside, I barked, "Call the fire department!" We grabbed buckets from the shed, hauling water from the lake, throwing it against the flames as they crept closer. Smoke burned my lungs, my eyes watering, but I refused to stop. Emily coughed beside me, her face streaked with soot, but she kept working. Kelly shouted instructions, his voice hoarse but steady. By the time the fire trucks arrived, we had beaten the flames back enough to save the cabin. The woods were scorched, the air thick with ash, but the old structure still stood. Emily collapsed into my arms, coughing, her chest heaving. "Grandpa," she whispered, "they really want us gone." I kissed her soot-streaked forehead. "Then they'll have to try harder, because we're not moving an inch." Later that night, as the fire crew cleared out, Harris arrived. He walked the charred tree line, shaking his head. "Arson?" he muttered. "They're not playing games anymore. Richard, this is going to get worse before it gets better. But I promise you we're closing in. Reyes already called me. That drive was gold. I nodded, exhausted but resolute. Then we keep standing. Back inside, I opened my notebook once more and wrote in thick, heavy strokes. They tried fire, cabin survived, family intact. Truth is stronger than flames. As I set down the pen, I looked at Emily asleep on the couch. Soot still smudged across her cheek. My chest swelled with pride and sorrow all at once. They could throw fire, threats, shadows, but they didn't understand the one thing that kept me unbroken. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for her. The smell of smoke still lingered in the air the next morning, clinging to the cabin walls like a warning that wouldn't wash away. Emily sat at the table picking at her cereal, her eyes heavy from a night of coughing. Kelly was already on the phone, pressing the DA's office for updates. While I stood at the window, staring at the scorched tree line, the cabin had survived the fire, but I knew what it meant. They weren't just trying to scare us anymore. They wanted us erased. By mid-morning, Harris pulled up the drive in his cruiser, dust trailing behind him. His face was tight, his jaw set. He stepped inside and laid a manila folder on the table. Reyes pushed the investigation forward. With that flash drive, she's subpoenaing Bayview Holdings as records. But he hesitated. Word is, the syndicate isn't waiting for the courts. They're planning something more direct. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. How direct? Direct enough that my deputies picked up chatter about a hit. His eyes flicked toward Emily. They're not just after you anymore. Richard, they know she's the one who warned you. The words punched the air out of my lungs. I looked at Emily, my granddaughter, my anchor, and saw her face pale. Her spoon clattered into the bowl. They want me, she whispered. I knelt beside her, gripping her hand. They'll never touch you, not while I'm breathing. Harris placed a hand on my shoulder. I can arrange protective custody, move both of you somewhere safe until the trial. But I shook my head. No, this cabin is ours. It's Linda's. If we leave, they win. We stand here. Kelly, still on the phone, covered the receiver. If we run, it sends the wrong message. Standing our ground forces their hand, and once they overstep, the DA can crush them. Harris exhaled. Then I'll double patrols. But Richard, be ready. They won't knock on the door next time. They'll kick it in. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being hunted. Every creak of the cabin floor, every gust of wind against the boards made my hand twitch toward the shotgun leaning by the door. Emily tried to study at the table, but her eyes kept darting to the windows. Finally, she closed her book and whispered, "Grandpa, how do you stay calm?" I sat beside her, rubbing the tired lines from my face. You just learn to act anyway. Fear is part of it. But you remember what matters more than fear. She nodded, though her lip trembled. You and Grandma built this place so strong, she murmured. I'll help keep it standing. Sometime after midnight, the silence broke. Tires on gravel, headlights flooding the porch, then doors slamming, not one, several. I motioned Emily to the back room and grabbed the shotgun. Kelly was already on his feet, phone in hand. Call Harris. I hissed. He nodded, dialing. Through the crack in the blinds, I counted 4 men moving toward the cabin. One carried a crowbar. Another's hand glinted with the unmistakable shape of a pistol. My pulse roared in my ears, but my grip on the gun stayed steady. The first man swung the crowbar at the door. The wood splintered under the blow. Emily cried out from the back, and my heart nearly split. Get out here, old man, one of them shouted. You wanted a fight, tonight's your night. Kelly whispered. Sheriff's on the way. 10 minutes. 10 minutes felt like forever. The second strike landed, the hinges groaning. I raised the shotgun. Aiming at the door, my voice was steady, louder than I expected. Step through that door, and you won't walk back out. The men paused, muttering to each other. Then one shouted back, You think one old man with a shotgun scares us? We own this county. I fired a warning shot into the air. The boom rattling the cabin. Silence followed, then curses, then retreating footsteps. They hadn't expected me to stand tall. Tires screeched as their vehicles tore back down the drive just as red and blue lights flared through the trees. Harris burst through the door moments later, weapon drawn, deputies at his side. He scanned the porch, then looked at me. You held them off. I lowered the shotgun, my arms trembling now that the danger had passed. Emily rushed from the back room and threw herself into my chest, sobbing. I held her tight, my own knees nearly giving way. "They'll be back," I said hoarsely. "Maybe," Harris replied, "but now we've got witnesses, tire tracks, shell casings. Every time they push, they leave more evidence, and Reyes is watching. Their noose is tightening." When the deputies cleared out, and the cabin was quiet again, I sank into the old chair by the fire. My notebook lay open on the table, the ink of last night's entry still fresh. I picked up the pen and wrote crowbar at the door, gun in the dark. Fear doesn't win if you don't let it. Tonight. The cabin stood. Emily curled beside me, her head on my shoulder, finally drifting into uneasy sleep. I stared into the fire, the flames licking higher, shadows dancing on the walls. They thought they could break me with fire, with fear, with brute force at my own door. But they didn't understand that this fight wasn't about land, or even survival. It was about legacy. And a legacy worth protecting doesn't crumble, it endures. The night after the break-in attempt, I didn't sleep. Neither did Emily. We sat by the fire long after Harris and his deputies left, the glow painting the cabin walls in restless shadows. She leaned against me, her small frame heavy with exhaustion, yet her eyes wide open, watching the flames. I could see it in her face she was carrying fear too heavy for a child, and that, more than the crowbar marks on my door, burned me alive inside. At dawn, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let them keep dictating the terms. They had thrown fire, they had thrown fists at my door. Now it was my turn to strike. By mid-morning, Kelly and I were back in the DA's office. The flash drive evidence spread across a long table. Reyes looked more energized than before. A stack of subpoenas already prepared. The attempted arson and assault gave me all I need. She said, "With your testimony, Richard, and the ledgers from Bayview, we can take this straight to a grand jury." I leaned forward. "Then don't wait. Do it today. Every day we stall is another day they circle my granddaughter's bed at night." Reyes nodded once. "Then today it is." That afternoon, deputies raided Bayview Holdings' Houston office. Trucks rolled out with boxes of files, computers, hard drives. News crews swarmed the sidewalks, their cameras flashing as agents carried evidence through the doors. By evening, the Chronicle headline blared Bayview Holdings under criminal investigation. Syndicate leaders named. The syndicate didn't take the humiliation quietly. Just past midnight, another anonymous call came to the cabin. A gravelly voice rasped, "You put us in the paper. Hayes, tomorrow, we put you in the ground." Emily trembled when she overheard it, but I simply hung up the phone. I'd already chosen my ground. The next day, Harris stationed 2 unmarked cars near the cabin. Kelly stayed 2, refusing to leave our side. Emily clung to her backpack as she sat at the table, trying to do homework, but I could see the way her hands shook. "Grandpa," she said softly, "why won't they just stop?" I sat beside her, folding her hands into mine, because men like that don't know when to quit. They only stop when someone makes them, and that's what we're doing now. By evening, the tension snapped. Headlights barreled down the drive, faster this time, not creeping like before. 3 black SUVs screeched to a halt in front of the cabin. Doors flew open, and half a dozen men spilled out. Some carried bats, others glints of steel at their waists. Emily gasped. Kelly shouted for her to get to the back room. I grabbed the shotgun. Before they reached the porch, red and blue lights erupted from both sides of the property. Harris had set a trap. Deputies swarmed from the trees, weapons raised, voices commanding sheriff's department, on the ground. The syndicate thugs froze for a heartbeat. Then chaos exploded. 2 tried to run but were tackled in the dirt. One swung his bat at a deputy and was dropped in an instant. Another reached for a gun, but Harris himself leveled him with a single warning shot that cracked through the night. When it was over, 6 men lay cuffed and cursing in the mud. Their SUVs sat abandoned with engines still running, headlights glaring into the trees like wild eyes. Emily peeked from the back, her face pale but alive with something I hadn't seen in weeks. Relief. Harris turned to me, his hat pushed back, sweat streaking his face. "That's it. Richard, we've got them. Reyes will bury Bayview with this. The rest will crumble. I lowered the shotgun slowly, my arms shaking from more than the weight. Emily ran into my chest, clutching me so hard it hurt. "It's over," she whispered. I kissed the top of her head. "Yes, sweetheart, it's over." We stood, and we didn't break. The following days blurred with interviews, statements, and reporters calling me everything from a whistleblower to a stubborn old fool. But the labels didn't matter. What mattered was that Bayview was finished. Daniel, caught in their net, finally called me from county lockup, his voice broken. "Dad," he rasped, "I was wrong." I listened, my heart aching, but I gave him the only truth I had left. "You were, son, but there's still time to be better for Emily's sake." Weeks later, when the trial announcements filled the papers, the cabin stood untouched, its scars from fire and crowbar now marks of survival. Emily sat on the porch with me one evening, her hand in mine, the lake glowing gold under the sunset. "Grandma would have been proud," she said softly. I smiled at her, the ache in my chest finally easing. "She'd have been proud of you. You're the reason I didn't give in." The cabin creaked gently in the evening breeze, the foundation strong, the walls steady, and as I sat there with Emily beside me, I realized something simple and profound. The cabin wasn't just our shelter. It was our story. A story that had weathered fire, fear, and shadows yet still stood tall. And so would we. And that's how it all ended. The syndicate thought they could scare me off with threats, fire, and brute force. But they underestimated one thing: what a grandfather will do to protect the only family he has left. Emily and I still live in the cabin. The scars on the wood remind us of what we survived, but they also remind us that no matter how dark the night gets, light always wins when you choose to stand firm. Looking back, I don't think of myself as a hero. I'm just a stubborn old man who refused to let fear take away my granddaughter's safety or my wife's legacy. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this family isn't about blood or last names. It's about trust, loyalty, and standing shoulder to shoulder when the world tries to knock you down. Before you go, make sure to hit that subscribe button and share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. And let me know in the comments if you were in my shoes. Would you have stayed and fought or walked away? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Because this isn't just my story. It's a reminder to all of us when the storm comes. You choose whether to run or to stand and fight for what matters most.